This lecture is going to discuss Marshall McLuhan's Tetrad. Marshall McLuhan was an English professor and a scholar of media and literacy. And you put those two together, media literacy, at the University of Toronto. Toward the end of his life, he came up with a concept called the Tetrad, which he believed was a model for assessing, analyzing, and predicting the social effects of technology and their effects on society. McLuhan had numerous interesting ideas related to the media. His most famous slogan was, "The medium is the message." Maybe you've heard that slogan. Today we're going to talk about the Tetrad, which is the model that you will use for your final projects to assess the impacts of a technology on society. McLuhan felt that media and technology had taken humanity through several eras. In the beginning, when humanity hadn't invented writing yet, he believed that we were in the aural era, or the hearing era, and our ears dominated our sense perception. He believed that we existed in a tribal state this way, and that we were aware of information all around us, what he called an all-at-onceness. Once writing was developed, he believed that the eyes took over as the dominant sensory organ, and literacy had a number of effects. It caused us to be more sequential, more individualistic, more process-oriented, and more focused on things that were in front of us and that we could see. When print came along, it was the first mass production media, and print caused us a number of societal changes, but one of which was the mechanization, capitalization, literacy as a product, industrialization. He felt that it led to a number of significant changes in society, but again, our eyes continued to dominate the sensory field. Then when the electronic devices came in to play, and primarily McLuhan was interested in the effects of radio and TV broadcasting, here he felt that it took us back. The electronic age was what he called re-tribalizing us, and it brought back what he called a sense of touch. And it's in touch that McLuhan feels that the resonant interval, or what he called the frontier of change and process, exists. And touch is that point where it puts us into contact with something. So he means touch more than just the physical touch sensation, but it's that idea of being put into connection or into contact with something. He talks about that resonant interval as in a metaphor that he uses of a steering wheel. And before power steering, and even early power steering models, steering wheels on cars had play in them, meaning you could turn the wheel, but it would take a second before the actual wheels would change. There was some movement in the steering wheel before the wheels would engage. And it was that resonant space where there was play in the wheel. That's what he called the resonant interval. And it was there in that resonant interval where action would take place, where things could change, where structures and interpretation occurred. And so he said in one of his books, he said, touch is the resonant interval or frontier of change and process, and is indispensable for the study of technological effects. Interface is the basis of the relationship between visual and acoustic space. Touch represents where the action is in all structures, where we interpret and reinterpret ideas. And so it's in the Tetrad that we can be put back into touch with the effects of the technologies that we're studying. Okay, let's take a closer look at the Tetrad and some of the questions that it's asking, and then look at how that will help you to analyze your technology that you're going to look at in your study. So begin by going out to the Prezi. Go to the part of the Prezi that says McLuhan's Tetrad, and there you'll find the 4 questions that the Tetrad asks, with some additional material and video clips inserted. You're going to want to spend a little bit of time watching the Prezi separate from this lecture. Start there. The Tetrad asks 4 questions. It first asks, what is enlarged or enhanced by the technology? So the technology is going to affect some faculty of ours, of humans, and it's going to enlarge or enhance that faculty. Second question is, what is being eroded or made obsolete? McLuhan talked about obsolescing, that some faculty is obsolesced by a new technology. Thirdly, he asks, what is retrieved from an earlier technology? So what feature of some old technology has been retrieved and brought forward into the new technology that had been previously obsolesced? And then fourthly, he says, if pushed far enough, the technology will actually reverse into or flip into something that it wasn't supposed to do. So it will reverse, something will be reversed or flipped into when the technology is pushed to the limit of its potential. Okay, so those are the 4 questions. Let's dive a little bit deeper into each one. So the first question is, what does the technology retrieve from a previously obsolesced technology? And so, for instance, he suggests that a simple technology like the flagpole really retrieves the old spear and banner. When armies were marching into war, they would often carry a banner on the end of a spear, and they'd march into battle with that. And so he suggests that the flagpole, when you stake a claim or a ground with a flagpole, it really represents that spear and banner of conquest. So the flagpole brings that back. This is our territory. We own this. We've conquered this. We represent this place. This is the new banner that flies over this space, this location. And so the flagpole, he says, represents that. And it is retrieved, the banner and spear are retrieved in the current technology. So if you remember from the Hempel article, if you want to pull that out, that might be helpful as well. In the Hempel article, he talks about several technologies and breaks them down using the Tetrad. And one of the first electronic technologies is the telegraph. And for the telegraph, he talks about retrieving corporate or group involvement that had previously been lost by dispersion of population and things like that. But when the telegraph was invented, it brought people back together. And he said it retrieved corporate group involvement so that now one city knew exactly what the other city was doing. He uses the example of Baltimore and Washington. So when congressional events were taking place, Baltimore knew right away what was happening because they would send these telegraphs back and forth. And so you had more of a centralization of information that you had previously been lost. And it also retrieved the ability to have empires, to stay connected to the root, to the core of the empire. And he suggests that preserved the space bias. The telegraph was interesting in that it was one of the first technologies to really separate communication from time and space constraints. It used to be that news was delayed. It's no longer delayed with the telegraph. And it used to be that it was located in more of a central or a space. It was isolated to a space. But now the news broke free of space and time. It could be communicated instantaneously, and it could travel great distances instantaneously. And so you free it from those space and time constraints. So that's the first thing. You need to look at your technology. What's being brought back by that technology? And when you think through these with regard to the technology that you're studying, you need to be really creative and think deeply. It's not going to come to you the first time you consider the question. You have to process this, explore it, mull it over in your mind until some of these connections will take some thought. Okay? And obviously, the deeper the connection, the better the analysis. So give yourself some time to really explore these things. Okay, move on to the second question then in your slide set, and that's going to be what does the technology erode or make obsolete? So every time a new technology comes in, it's going to displace or move aside some old technology. They don't always go away, but it does erode them. Sometimes it completely makes them obsolete, but sometimes it just erodes them. So, for instance, the computer, when the computer came into really prominent use, and you might say the market was saturated with computers, it really eroded the typewriter. And as we became more of an electronic document processing culture, the typewriter was really displaced or made obsolete. Now, for a long time, there were certain things you could only do with a typewriter, and a lot of businesses hung on to their typewriters because there were certain things that you needed to just be able to slip a piece of paper in, type up right away, until we came up with documents and forms and templates that could do what the typewriter used to do. Now, in fact, I had an old typewriter that I kept around for a long time to do certain functions. But now we rarely, if ever, use a typewriter. So that has become eroded or made obsolete. The example of the telegraph, he says that the telegraph made obsolete the old Addison and Steele news sheet. These were the broad sheets that were made up for papers around the country. And he said that the telegraph now made those news sheets essentially obsolete, that it shifted the focus of news from why and what happened to when it happened. And it was all about the immediacy of getting the scoop, getting the word out about an event that had taken place. So he says it valued reporting events over commentary and editorial, and the old broadsheet news styles that contained lengthy essays or opinion columns. He said that those basically had been made obsolete by those. We still certainly have an opinion page on the newspaper, but that's by no means the focus. Now it's this montage of events that have taken place that really lack the context of a why and a what perspective, and it's more of a when perspective. This happened, and here's when it happened. The next question, so that's what does the technology erode or make obsolete? The next question, then, if you advance the slide, is what does the technology enlarge or enhance? It always takes some thing, some faculty, some ability, and it expands it, it amplifies it. And again, in the case of the telegraph, he says that the telegraph amplified the isolated incident into an inclusive dateline. So now we have this timeline of things that have happened, and that's what's been amplified or intensified in the technology, and that it's not just an isolated incident that occurs anymore, but we can see things occurring in time because they're reported immediately. It used to be that you had to select out events because there was a delay between when something happened and when you wrote it up and could publish it and get it out to the public. But now we can tell them right away, and so we get more of a sense of a timeline of things that are happening. So he says the telegraph warped time and space along the lines. Communication delay was taken away, and so the focus of news and information, again, became not so much why something happened, but when it happened. So what does the technology that you're looking at enlarge or enhance? And then the final question is, what does the technology reverse into if it's pushed to its limits, to its extreme? And in the case of the telegraph, Hempel talks about how it reverses into a corporatization of information networks. That's one of the ones that we see most prominently today, that when you push that ability to communicate instantaneously to its extreme, then it becomes all about infrastructure, getting the news stations and the cables laid and the broadcast network in place, so that you can publish your news as quickly as possible. And then it evolved into the 24-hour news cycle, where things were being covered all the time and constantly updated. And so it really generated these monopolies of news, like CNN and MSNBC, BBC over in the UK. You have these monopolies or concentrations of news and ownership. Rupert Murdoch, you may have heard his name. He's in the news now. He's the owner of News Corp, and he has a huge monopoly on newspapers and television stations and really news production. And he's got presence around the world, both in the U.S. and in Europe. And so he's got this concentration of resources and infrastructure, and then that leads to what some have called the manufacturing of consent. And that is that if they can bombard you with certain messages, then you will unwittingly buy into their perspective. The concerns that these large media monopolies have will become your concerns, because they train your attention on them 24 hours a day. So maybe you would not naturally think that some subject or event was important, but because they bombard you with it 24 hours a day, you then will focus on it and it will become important to you. So that's this idea of the technology will reverse into or flip into something that wasn't intended when you push it to an extreme. And every technology will do that. If you run it out to the end of its course and push it to its limits, it flips into some unintended consequence. And previously we've talked a little bit about some of those unintended consequences. So the cell phone, the intended thing about the cell phone is for you to be able to stay in touch, to communicate with people. Perhaps an unintended consequence is that you are no longer able to get out of touch. It becomes a chain. It becomes something that holds you instead of you using it to stay in touch. It's used to keep you within reach, if you want to think about it that way. Okay, so those are the 4 questions. What does it extend or amplify, enhance? What does it make obsolete or erode? What does it retrieve? And what does it reverse into or flip into? And so you want to look at whatever technology it is that you are going to study. You want to look at those 4 questions and really think deeply about them. Process these. Again, it's not going to be the first thing that pops into your brain. You want to look at all of the different aspects of your technology. Think metaphorically. If you were to, like the discussion of the cell phone there a second ago, if you were to think about the cell phone as a connecting device, is it something that you reach out with, or is it something that withholds or restrains you? So you can think about it in terms of a chain. And so if you think metaphorically, sometimes those ideas will become more creative and will allow you to process them more deeply. So I encourage you to do that. Look at your technology, think through the questions, and that's going to be a key part of your final project, your video essay that you're going to do. Okay, I want to end this presentation by looking at a couple of tetrads that people have thought through that look at current technologies and one older technology, print. And just so you can see the kinds of questions that they're asking using the tetrad questions, the kind of insights and effects that come about from asking those questions. So the first technology that we'll take a look at is the computer. And you can see that in this tetrad, the computer is thought to accelerate calculations from doing them manually to the speed of light. It erodes mechanical sequence because multiple things are happening at once. It retrieves the power of numbers, the quantitative power of numbers, and it reverses into simultaneous pattern recognition. So that's one way of applying the tetrad to the computer technology. A second tetrad that has been done to the area of print, and particularly this one was looking at the effect of print on Christianity. And you can see that it enhances the notion of personal relationship with God, nurturing individual spirituality. It reverses into a reducing of the gospel from an effect on a life to a set of propositions because it's in print. You can take a look at the rest of what that does. Another tetrad has been done on current blogging and enhances communication and collaboration, makes obsolete traditional media as the only authority for information because now everybody can comment. It retrieves oral tradition. As Walter Ong says, it's secondary orality. Becoming much more important in this day and age, and it reverses into an expansion of the internet's features, moving to video from writing, more features of instant messaging and things like that. Final tetrad is e-magazines or e-textbooks. You're getting some experience with that in this course with your e-textbook. Enhancing multimedia examples and interactivity, making obsolete printed magazines, retrieving oral data sharing, and reversing into virtual reality, for instance, in Second Life. So those are a couple of examples of tetrads and the way people have thought about them and asked questions about a given technology and then coming up with the effects that it produces. It's the combination of questions that leads us to understanding the impact of a technology.